Today I want to show you what I think is the best bass sound ever. It cuts through a mix, it's got great low end, but enough mids and highs that you can hear it on phones. It's wide, but not so wide that it introduces phasing. To be honest, it answers every single question I have when it comes to handling low end in your music. Now, this bass sound is actually a combination of 3 different elements. Let me show you what they sound like all together. It sort of sounds like a synth, sort of sounds like a bass guitar, sort of sounds like a piano bass, but all 3 elements don't get in the way of each other and they blend really, really well. And I want to show you later how in different areas of the frequency spectrum, this bass still really kicks through in a mix. But the first sound that I use is actually a sine wave that I've mangled and added a few effects to, which I'm going to show you in a moment. But this is actually where it starts. This is the Logic sampler without anything loaded in, and it's a really lovely sounding sine wave. I've got an attack here of 6.2 milliseconds, and then it goes down to a sustain of 29.5 with a decay of 2,305 milliseconds. So that creates this decay that sounds a little bit more like a sustained bass guitar. The first plugin in this chain is called Gnaw by Cleveground, and it basically adds extra harmonics. It's really, really musical, and you can choose how extreme you want it to be. I've got this on the medium setting. This would be a completely mono sound if I didn't have some chorus on it. So I've got the tal chorus here. So it just adds a little bit of width there. The next plugin I use is called Shade. This just creates a little bit of rhythmic interest. And then I have a tremolo plugin here, which just oscillates a little. Now, as nice as this is to be moving left and right, you really want a solid bass line that goes straight up the middle. So I've also added this mono maker. You don't have to use this EQ, but basically this mono maker, from 60 hertz down, it's completely a mono, and from 60 hertz up, it's as wide as it would be. The final thing I have here is a little EQ just to roll off some of the top end. It's adding these little extra harmonics. If I turn off all of these plugins, and that's the first ingredient in creating a bass sound that works across your iPhone, your MacBook speakers, your high quality headphones. The next sound, this is from Kontakt, and it's a lovely sounding bass actually. I use this quite a lot at the moment. This is the palm muted sound. Now it's a lovely sound by itself, but I want the consistency of the sine bass that I've already got. So actually having another bass with those low frequencies is going to get in the way of that. So I'm actually using a high pass filter here at about 130 hertz. I love the sound of the string there on the frets. And then I've got MV2 here, which is sort of like an expander and compressor built in. So if you just want to bring up the quiet stuff, you can turn up the low level. And then you can kind of squash it in with the high level as well. I don't need it to be quite that extreme. And then finally, I've got the Native Instruments Transient Master here, just to remove some of the decay. So you can hear how the two combine really nicely. We've got a lovely resonant sub bass, and then we've got that audible guitar on the top. This is the Vintage Vibe Tine bass, which again, if I turn off these other plugins, I've been using this bass sound for years actually. One of the things I love about it is this mechanical noise. I've turned down the color shift slightly just to make it a little bit darker, but in a similar way, I'm taking off some of these low frequencies as well. I've removed some of the high end because it's quite a noisy sound. Even with the denoising turned on, it just got a little bit hissy. I've got a similar MV2 profile on here, just to soften that initial transient and bring up some of the sustain. And then I'm kind of doing the reverse actually with this, in removing some of that decay. So all three of those combined sound like this. So if I add some compression to this, I'm using the SSL bus compressor here, a 3 millisecond attack, a 1.2 second release, and I've also got a high pass filter sidechain at 70 Hertz. So it's not going to compress based on the information it receives from below 70 Hertz. Again, this is just to create a little bit more sustain, and then I've also got a bit of R bass on here as well by Waves. This is a really excellent plugin for basses. And then finally, for the context of this track, I'm using a bit of Track Spacer, which is a sidechain-based compression tool, which is actually sidechained to the kick drum. So if you have a listen to both the drums and the bass combined, so with the track spacer there, it's taking out some of those low frequencies when the kick drum's engaged, but it's only affecting up to about 170 Hertz. So the remainder of those frequencies aren't being compressed by the kick drum. Now I've got a small bright room here. This is a Pro R from FabFilter, 0.6 seconds. And then I've added this MV2 again, just to compress and bring up some of the low level. But I added this to the sub bass line. It's very, very subtle, but I think it makes a bit of a difference. Now, something interesting here is I would really recommend when working with low end to remove the low frequencies from your reverbs. This is the only reverb I've got in this track right now, and it does depend what frequencies I want to pull out. But here I've got a high pass from 105 Hertz, and that will remove any low rumble from duplicating itself when you send it into a reverb. Now, the question of whether you put this before or after the reverb is kind of up to you. For me, the reason I've done it this way around is because if the bass is going into the reverb, it's going to create some additional harmonics up above, which I might want to have. You know, sometimes if I take this Grandia piano, for example, you can tell I've played the low notes, but if you have a look at the EQ, I've actually filtered from 60 Hertz down anyway. So it's not necessarily that you can't tell there are low notes in it, it's just that the low frequencies aren't there, and the whole overtone and harmonic series that comes from that is really powerful. So I think it's best to create the harmonics and then filter off the low frequencies. So by sending the sub bass into the reverb, and then it can generate any frequencies that it will, and then just cutting off the low frequencies, we still get some of that room into the sound, whereas if we did it the other way around, there wouldn't be any harmonics to generate from the sub bass, if that makes sense. Now, if I just play you the bass and the drums, I've got a couple of things up here. First of all, this is a very crude EQ of what I think a phone speaker would sound like. So about 250 Hertz is filtering off at, and then at 4K, it takes a bit of a dip. This isn't exact, obviously. This is what this track sounds like through a phone. Now, if I turn off these two extra bass sounds that we've got and all of my extra little plugins here, this is what it would have sounded like. So you can see the importance there of having all of these extra little frequencies. If I just keep these turned off for now, but introduce the other aspects again. You can hear there's a bit of a grit there, which I like, but it's also got a really sharp decay, which I think is helpful when you're working with drums and other aspects that are more percussive. The other thing I've got here on my master bus, just to double check how things sound, is a mono maker. It's just a gain plugin set to mono. I'm going to keep this turned off for now. I'm going to play you the whole track as it is with this phone frequency. So to have a bass sound like this that can fold down to mono really nicely, that can work on phones and other speakers, and is so playable and low CPU that you can actually just play it as a single keyboard instrument. Is really, really nice for me, and I hope you get a lot of use out of this as well. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are, what bass sounds you always go to. Are you more of a synth person or a bass guitar kind of person? I'd be really curious to know. Subscribe if you haven't done already, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.